Hello, ghouls. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of the Shrouded in Darkness podcast, where we shine a light on the cases that the world forgot. This is your true crime-obsessed host, Marlena. Let's start with our sources for today's research. We have the famous Trials website, the Innocence Project, and the Strange and Unexplained podcast. Today's case takes us to West Memphis, Arkansas, and a case that's at the top of my list for ones that intrigue me. But let me warn you, there are some definite trigger warnings in this episode, including child abuse, and we're going to be looking at a couple different things, different angles, so get ready, ghouls. Let's jump straight into the timeline. It's May 5th, 1993. Now, in case you weren't around during this time, it was very normal for kids to do their own thing. Go out, ride bikes with their friends, explore the woods, even walk down to the convenience store, all without adult supervision. All the things that terrify parents now. Things were very different back then, but also we didn't have social media or cell phones. News wasn't blasted as soon as it happened. So bear that in mind as we get into this. So again, the date is May 5th, 1993. We have 3 8-year-old boys, Steve Edward Branch, Christopher Mark Byers, and James Michael Moore. All of these boys are second graders at Weaver Elementary School. They're the best of friends, and each has received their wolf rank in their local scout group, which kind of shows these kids definitely love the outdoors. So let's talk a little bit about each child. Steve's parents were Stephen and Pamela. They divorced when he was an infant, and his mother would later marry Terry Hobbs. Stevie was an honor student, and he also had a younger half-sister. Chris's parents were Ricky and Melissa. Another divorce, and Melissa later marries John Byers. John actually legally adopts Chris, and he gains an older stepbrother. Chris was described as being a normal 8-year-old kid that still believed in the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Lastly, Michael's parents were Todd and Dana. He also had a 9-year-old sister, and Michael was thought to be more the leader of his friend group, and he would often be seen wearing his scout uniform, even if he wasn't at the meeting. So these kids, like I said, they're the best of friends, 3 8-year-old boys. They knew this area, they knew their little neighborhood community, and most likely, the community probably knew them as well. They're parts of the local scouts. So there's a lot of things that kept them, known and familiar with the area. So on this day, Stevie, Chris, and Michael took their bikes out after school. This was a very normal routine for them. Only on this day, the boys never returned home. John Byers was the first to file a report at 7 p.m. when Chris didn't come home. The other parents soon followed. Not sure if this is relevant to the case, but Michael's mother learned that he was missing only when she made it home from work, which was at 9 p.m. According to reports, Michael's stepfather, Terry Hobbs, did go out and search for him, but not sure why he never let Pamela know. Again, until she actually got home. So police, along with family and friends of the community, start searching that night. They search the wooded area where the boys would have been, but find nothing. The next morning, the chief inspector started another search. By that afternoon, the remains of those 3 boys had been found. Before I describe the condition of their bodies, if you're uncomfortable with such things, I suggest skipping forward some. This gets pretty awful. So all 3 boys were nude and tied up with their own shoelaces. All 3 suffered abrasions and contusions to their faces, to their ears. The bases of their skulls were fractured. There was a possibility of hemorrhaging on at least one of their brains. Chris's genitals had been mutilated, to put it mildly. His cause of death was from injuries to his head. Michael and Stevie's causes of death were injuries and drowning. And just so you know, there were no signs of sexual assault, despite what the police are seeing at the scene. As for the crime scene where the boys are found, there wasn't really a whole lot to help the police. There were even conflicting reports on whether or not there may have been a second crime scene. So now you may be thinking this is the reason the case is known as the West Memphis Three. Well, it's actually not because of these murdered victims. It's about the next section we're about to dive into. Small towns around this time, 80s and 90s, it seems whenever something awful happens, there's a gruesome murder or people, something happens in the community, people are so quick to jump to satanic rituals or some kind of cult activity. This case with those three boys is no different. Now bear in mind, in this particular case, I already said there was very little evidence at the crime scene. That especially means anything satanic. There was nothing there that indicated anything cult-related, no pentagrams, no altars. But this is the theory that the police go with. And this leads us to Damien Eccles. In 1993, Damien was 18 years old. He was a high school dropout and an introvert that dressed in black. He wrote dark poems, had the word evil tattooed on his knuckles, and was on the law enforcement's radar. He was a self-described Wiccan and had previously been on suicide watch in a psychiatric ward. Now, personally, when I hear this description, I think this person is really trying to figure out who they are. I mean, he's 18. And mental health is not something to joke about or throw blame at. Well, Damien was brought in for questioning multiple times regarding this case. 3 times, actually, between May 7th and May 10th. He tried telling the police that he didn't even know those 3 boys, that he was at home with his mother that night. He even took a polygraph test, which wasn't conclusive, as they often are in my opinion, which is why they can't be used in a courtroom. The police don't believe him. But they also don't think he acted alone, not with 3 individual victims. So the police turn to his very small friend group. And they also meet someone named Vicky Hutchison around the same time. First, let me share this small bit of information. I can't guarantee this is factual, but it's something I did read, so I at least want to mention it. It seems Vicky was being interviewed on an unrelated charge on May 6th. Now, this would have been before the boys were discovered. She had her young son with her on the same day, and he brought up knowing Stevie, Michael, and Chris because they had just become missing. So this was after they were reported missing, but before their bodies were found. So her son claims that he witnessed the murders and that it happened at a playhouse and that it was conducted by Spanish-speaking Satanists. Again, I don't know how true any of that is. So, what I do know about Vicky, at some point, she asked a kid named Jesse Miss Kelly to introduce her to Damien. And then one day, when Damien came to her house, supposedly, he talked nonstop about the murders. How he was accused, how he'd been questioned. And honestly, she says a whole lot more stuff. Honestly, it just sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Talks about a Wiccan meeting, even an orgy. But I don't feel like any of this is relevant to the case. Because not only are these teenagers talking about, she's like 30 years old. Also, fun fact, she recants her entire testimony 10 years after the fact, in 2003. Then she says that she's been coerced by police and that everything she said was a fabrication. Well, let's back up to Jesse Miss Kelly. Jesse seems to be basically just an acquaintance of Damien. Jesse is also a high school dropout, and he has the IQ of a grade school student, like 2nd grade. But he does have a reputation for temper and fistfights at school. So Jesse is brought in for questioning on June 3rd. Despite being a minor, he was questioned without a parent or guardian present. And just for the record, there are conflicting reports on whether or not the police actually had consent to interrogate him. Nevertheless, they're still questioning him. And so police happen to mention that there's a $35,000 reward for anyone that helps them solve the case of those 3 boys being murdered. I mean, it almost kind of sounds like a bribe. Why would they mention it? And I'm sorry, but with this poor kid's intelligent being on a low bar, I mean, he could have easily been taken advantage of. Well, according to reports, Jesse was questioned for a crazy long time. Hours of just back and forth. The same questions being asked time and time again, over and over and over. Jesse eventually just starts repeating what the police are saying. This, schools, is when their recorder comes out. The recorder wasn't out at the beginning, mind you. It comes out once Jesse starts repeating what the police have already said. And now this is when we hear Jesse admit to seeing Damien kill those 3 boys. And because of this recorded testimony, which I personally think was entirely coerced by the police, Damien and Jesse are arrested. Now, at some point during all this, there is a 3rd person brought in. It's Damien's best friend, Jason Baldwin. Jason is only 16 years old. He's in 10th grade, and he's a good kid. He makes good grades. He has a great talent for sketching. And again, he's only 16. While being questioned, he was told that if he willingly testified against Damien, he would receive a lighter sentence. But he refused. He didn't want to lie. He was raised to always be honest and wasn't about to betray his friends. So now we have all 3 teenagers, Damien, Jesse, and Jason. All are arrested for the murders of Stevie, Chris, and Michael. And all will be tried as adults. Now, here are some tidbits of information I feel is important to share. Witnesses do come forward stating that Jesse was with them that day of the murders. Police just call them liars. A knife was found in a pond behind, I think it was Jason's home. But what's interesting about this, supposedly the divers were told exactly where to find the knife by prosecutor John Fogelman. Some also believe the knife had been there much longer than the suggested time. The same night of the murders in 93, a disoriented, dark-colored man covered in blood enters a local fast food restaurant, specifically Bojangles. The officer that took the statement went through the drive-thru window. Ghouls, he never entered the restaurant. It wasn't until the restaurant manager again brought up the incident after the murders made the news that the police finally sent someone to check out the place, the area, the restroom where the guy had been. But it doesn't look like any testing was actually done on anything they found. So along with this blood-covered man, there were 2 other suspects in the case, which very little is known about. 2 more teenagers, mind you. Chris Morgan and Brian Holland. They both have criminal histories, and they both happened to move to California shortly after the murders happened. The main connection is between Chris Morgan and those boys because he drove an ice cream truck in that neighborhood. And during the interview, Chris also admitted to having blackouts and that he could have easily killed those boys and just not remember it. He would later recant this. Also, Chris and Brian both took polygraph tests, inconclusive results, of course. Now, let's look at the trial. Damien and Jason were tried together, while Jesse underwent his own trial. All 3 plead not guilty. The trial for Damien and Jason stuck with the involvement of satanic rituals. They were found guilty on 3 counts of capital murder. Damien Eccles was sentenced to death, while Jason Baldwin was sentenced to life in prison. Jesse Misskelley was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years in prison. Remember, these boys are 16, 17, 18 years old. All 3 would eventually fight for appeals, but they would be denied every single time. Defense teams would request retrials. No success. And let me just say, there were a lot of people that did not agree with those trials or the verdicts. People were absolutely in support of the West Memphis Three, fighting for them, saying they were wrongfully accused. This case floods the media. A documentary crew got wind of the story and wanted to do a film about it. This would be an HBO show titled Paradise Lost. The documentary aired in 1996, which would have been 3 years after the murders, bringing even more attention to the case. And just FYI, this same crew made 2 more parts to this documentary. You have Paradise Lost 2, Revelations, that came out in 2000, and the number 3 was Purgatory, which came out in 2011. Lori Davis comes into the picture after that first documentary and becomes a huge advocate for the West Memphis Three. It started with her simply writing to Damien, and eventually she just moved to Arkansas. Fun little fact, Lori and Damien end up falling in love, and they get married on December 3rd, 1999. They have a beautiful Buddhist ceremony right there at the Tucker Maximum Security Unit. You girls, Lori was instrumental to what happens next. People start fundraisers. Bands put on concerts, all to raise money and awareness for this case, for the West Memphis Three, for their defense. Lori even co-produced a documentary with the Peter Jackson. Yes, the same Peter Jackson from The Lord of the Rings. This film was called West of Memphis. In 2007, money was raised for the DNA testing of some hair found at the crime scene. Because, ghouls, it was never done before. We are in 2007. This murder case, these 3 young boys' lives, 14 years prior to this, and nothing had still been tested on this hair. And just so you know, when it was finally tested, they found out that it didn't match Damien, Jesse, or Jason, but yet they continued to sit in prison. Finally, in 2011, we see what's called an Alford plea. By Google standards, this is a legal arrangement where a defendant in a criminal case formally pleads guilty while simultaneously maintaining their innocence. So for Damien, Jason, and Jesse, they were sentenced to time served, so 18 years and 78 days. And on August 19th, 2011, the West Memphis Three were finally released. 18 years in prison. So here's my opinion on this. And I could easily be wrong, but based on what I've read about this Alford plea, this is what happened instead of there being another trial. And I'm thinking the plea was offered because they knew they couldn't win the case. Like, if it went back to trial, there's not enough evidence to prove anything. Especially now that new DNA had been tested. So we move on to 2023. Damien files an appeal for DNA testing, but was denied because he was no longer in jail. He appealed again, this time to the Arkansas Supreme Court. And in April 2024, the Supreme Court approved advanced DNA testing. And by late 2025, that's the end of last year, guys, the process has finally started. And ghouls, there were a lot of hair samples for the crime lab to go through. Things that were not tested before. We're looking at hair from each of the victims' bodies, hair from ligatures, from pieces of clothing, from sheets at the crime scene, from the ground at the crime scene. I mean, so many pieces for them to go through. And you know, after everything, I think Damien said it best. this isn't just about the West Memphis Three, those that were wrongfully accused. There were 3 young lives taken, not to mention the families and friends in that community that have been impacted by all of this. Currently, Damien is still married to Lori, and they live in either New Orleans or New York. It's kind of conflicting on that report. Damien is an author, and he has helped with numerous media projects. He also studies black magic, so I love that his personality has just continued to grow, and it's not been stifled for all that he's endured. From what I have found, Jason lives in Seattle, and he co-founded the Proclaim Justice, which is an organization that helps those that are wrongfully convicted. It looks like he was married at one point to someone named Holly Ballard, but they've since divorced, and that's basically all I can find about him. And also, with little information, Jesse, from what I can tell, he still remains in Arkansas. He works in construction, and it seems like he just lives a nice, quiet life away from the public eye. Before I wrap up this week's case, I do want to share a few theories and interesting facts, which is what we often find in unsolved cases, which this absolutely is unsolved. Terry Hobbs, which remember was Stevie's stepfather, he has been mentioned as a suspect. Remember, he's the one that knew the boys were missing, but never told the mom, didn't tell her anything until she got home from work at 9 p.m. And according to reports, he does have a criminal record, and he was MIA for a few hours the night of the incident. Also, a hair from the crime scene was linked to him. And that made me nothing, because, I mean, he's the stepfather to one of the children, so if he hugged him that day, he could easily have some of his DNA, cross-contaminate, whatever. So, also, one of the films created to show this case was actually the first movie that Metallica allowed their music to be in. I wasn't joking about this case being a huge deal to a lot of people and a lot of big names. Not just Metallica, but I'm talking Ozzy Osbourne, Johnny Depp, just to name a few. Dan Stidham, who was Jesse Miscallie's lawyer, he would eventually write a report describing all the errors, all the misconceptions that were made during this investigation by the police that were involved. Some of those errors include the bodies being removed from the water before the coroner arrived and before the area could be properly examined. So doing this, exposing the bodies to sunlight and even insects after being in the water, I mean, that could have really contaminated some forensic evidence. That could have made a huge, huge deal. So, I mean, that's kind of a major slip up. My thoughts on this one. I can't fathom what any of these boys went through. The murder victims or those wrongfully accused. I mean, if you listen to the part about the injuries, I just can't imagine that. And not only did they suffer at those injuries, but they watched their friends have to go through this. Like, we don't know the order of how things happened. And also the families, like the people in the community that have had to just live in this shadow all this time. So many people's lives were turned upside down during that summer of 1993. Damien, Jesse, and Jason sit in prison for 18 years, knowing there was absolutely nothing tying them to the case, knowing the real perpetrators were out there somewhere living free. And they're still out there. We still don't have answers. And that's not okay, ghouls. That's the furthest thing from being okay. Let's get this story shared. Let's help the West Memphis 6 get true justice. And hopefully one day there will be a breakthrough on this case. The family deserves that. All 6 victims in the case deserve that. Stevie Branch, Chris Byers, Michael Moore, Damien Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miscallie. If you have any details worth sharing, or maybe you have your own theory, please reach out. You can connect with us on Instagram and WordPress. Just search for the Shrouded in Darkness podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. And if there's a case from your hometown that deserves attention, send it to us. So tune in next week. We're going to be diving into the case of the Casanova killer. Until next time, ghouls, remember, the truth is always hiding in the darkness.